I'll pick up today and piggyback on where I left off last Friday. I remember, and I didn't actually watch the episode, so I'm depending on my memory now. I remember that I spent considerable time talking about the two additional stages that my graduate students and I inserted in Erickson's big template of what he called the 8 stages of life, and we came to call the 10 stages of life. These are two stages that unfold during the 30s and on into the 40s. After emancipation, we labeled the first one role flexibility versus role rigidity, based on the principle that once people had emancipated themselves, put their lives together, and taken reasonable charge of them, but the only thing they could depend upon was that circumstances were going to make some parts of their commitment, some parts of the structure they created, not workable anymore. A health problem would emerge, a loss of job would happen, the birth of a first child is a good thing that wrecks whatever the structure of life is. So some events would come up that would take things apart again. And we should never, as humans, feel too smug that we have everything together because we only have everything together for periods of time, and then something explodes the whole kind of contraption, and we have to adapt and change. And we came to think that there were some people, based upon their early life experiences, who should be labeled as having adequate role flexibility. They could roll with changing circumstances without being devastated by them and reconstruct and make changes in how their lifetime energies were apportioned. And there are those who suffer from role rigidity. They suffered a great deal and got totally lost if what they had put together was not functioning well anymore. And their suffering could become enormous. The second of the two stages, the one we labeled 3 prime, was social engagement versus social detachment. Uh, Once people got into the late 30s and on into their 40s, we felt that Alfred Adler had been correct that the path of human development, of healthy human development, leads to social caring, to wanting to give back to the world some kinds of goodness, and to move out of total egocentrism and into greater altruism during this era. And those who did not would suffer from a low grade depression. They were failing to massage an important part of their natures. So, in one way or another, starting in the late 30s or on into the 40s, people were looking for some kind of engagement out beyond the immediate family or the workplace. Uh, they would do things like coach Little League or take on a foster child, start giving to a philanthropy, uh, donate time to some cause, become politically active, do something in the hopes of having some effect on the world that was larger than just their immediate friends and family. In the workplace, often, or in the careers that we pursue, there was a desire to take on supervisory or mentoring kinds of roles. This was a way of taking the wisdom that we had been accumulating and starting to pass it on to the generation that was going to follow us. So we believe that these are important stages, they're real stages, and I focused a lot on them. So today I'm going to continue my focus on those two stages, and I'm going to talk about two things, and we'll see what else comes up. I'm going to talk about what are the signs for those of us who do the kind of work we do. What are the signs we'll see in the consulting room that ought to cue us that somebody is dragging difficulty in that stage into our presence? So let me again do screen sharing, find my handout. Uh, This should be the one. Let's see if it works. Yes, here it is. Let me bring it into the middle and scroll down through it. Here is epigenetic theory and some possible intervention paradigms. And I need to go to stages 2' and 3'. There we go. In the left-hand column are some of the signs that will be displayed to us and some of the complaints we'll hear from clients that suggest that they are dealing with role rigidity of a kind that's causing trouble with them. Uh, First of all, they tend to be quite irritable. They will come complaining of rising interpersonal tensions. Other people are setting them off more. They find other people's behavior less tolerable. Uh, Things are not going the way they want. Uh, they may be showing the beginnings of physiological stress disorders like getting headaches, stomach aches, being out of sorts, chronic and increasing irritability. That's really the defining characteristic. And in the face of their lives not working properly for them anymore, they make that wonderful systemic fallacy of insistently doing more of the same. They put in more hours at work. They study harder. They try and pursue their investment strategy with greater intensity. They are not flexible. Uh, they need to start questioning what they're doing, how they're invested in the world, what has real meaning, what new thing may need to come, or old thing they may need to be jettisoned, and instead they're doing more of the same. What is required to move through the stage more successfully? That's the center column. Transcendence of role prescriptions. Usually people who get stuck are partly living cultural imperatives. They're living things that they've been taught. They're following the norms of what should be the way they should live. And these are not working. So they need to start transcending whatever role prescriptions they've been following. They need richly to use all the talents of the self. They have lost pieces, things they don't ordinarily express, talents they never may have pursued, yearnings they may never have given serious consideration to. So they need to take that seriously and begin a process of self exploration. Also, they don't have to do everything themselves. If they're really bad at some part of what they've assigned themselves, it's very nice to delegate part of what they're doing if they're in a partnership with the other, to let the other take over. If you're a woman, for instance, in a marriage and you're sick and you're getting really irritable, you're sick and tired of being domestic all the time, you can see if your husband is up for the challenge of doing more cooking, taking over some of the things you think have been your role and your assignment in the world, and letting your partner take those things over. That's one of the advantages of having a life partnership. We can resort things, and things that may have felt good to us that we're sick of and don't want to do anymore. We can see if our partner's up for the challenge of taking the assignment on. And we can swap parts of who we are and what we do with the person who is our life partner. So these are conversations the therapist could find himself or herself having. They're in the right hand column. Guiding the renegotiation of couple, family, and or friendship working alliances. The kinds of negotiations I'm talking about, getting help from other people, shifting some things from being one's responsibility to being the responsibility of somebody else instead, offloading some things, taking new things on and offloading other things. The therapist also can spend a lot of time exploring the shadow self. What are the unrealized dreams? What are the unrealized potentials? What are the lost parts of the self that have never been claimed and brought out into the world? Making use of the fullness of the client's endowment and not having some of it hidden away and disconnected. And stressing over and over again to the client, there is no script, there is no correct way to live. Whatever will work and be effective, and whatever will take care of the basic needs of the self. Any arrangement that doesn't violate other human beings is wonderful. So those are my main comments upon working with people in trouble in stage 2 prime. Let me then talk about stage 3 prime, social engagement versus social detachment. The leading symptom of problems in this area is, I love that word, mild anhedonia, a kind of chronic sadness, an inability to take much pleasure or joy in anything. Apathy, mechanical like existence. Life is experienced as stale or flat. There's that wonderful song from the 1950s. Is that all there is? The client has a vague sense of having been cheated by the cultural project. They've done what they've been told is what good people do. They've lived it out to a great degree. They've achieved, they've been successful. They've taken the assignments and made them happen, but there's a vague sense of having been cheated, that the cultural project has not been sustaining. They may overcompensate. They may engage in a restless hunger for adventure. They may take up skydiving, have a love affair. They're trying to raise themselves up out of that sense of deadness. They engage in love affairs, other risk taking experiences to counteract the deadness that they're complaining about. But they don't see the riddle in the same way that I and my students do. The real principle of transition is they have to make an altruistic engagement. They need to find some way to seek selfless self fulfillment in life outside the workplace and the family. So, what the therapist can find himself or herself doing during this era is brainstorming engagement possibilities, arguing with materialistic values, with the consumer culture we live with, and the bottom line mentality that the most important things in the world is to increase one's net worth, one's holdings, and one's power and scope in whatever one is doing. Sometimes it's useful to make what I call assignments to visit Hogarthian landscapes. When I get couples who or persons who are feeling terrible about life, feeling the life is stale and flat, I send them to go wander around in the slums of Tijuana or someplace like that to see what really is raw out there. Watch movies of Made in India about the plight of the peasants in India. Uh, they need to compare and contrast what the quality of their life is all about compared with how most people live in most other places in the world. That often helps free them to want to do something about the plight of less fortunate people. All right, I will stop there with that. Those are my comments on working with problems and pains in those two developmental eras. And I will stop the screen sharing and I will go back and screen share the next handout. Good enough parenting. I assume unless I hear a protest from everybody, the good enough parenting is now on the screen. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. How wonderful. I think I've mastered this damn technology finally. So, when I originally wrote about good enough parenting, I think I may have mentioned that I wrote about parents supervising and interacting with kids during the first 5 stages when the kids are still at home. And after emancipation, I stopped commenting on good enough parenting, but it struck me in more recent years that parents remain significant and potentially influential persons in the life of their children long into adulthood, almost up to the brink of death. And that I should comment on what good enough parenting is after the children have emancipated themselves and left home. Stage 5, we've already talked about before. Here's stage 1 prime, the first stage on the other side of emancipation. Once offspring have taken up independent lives, parents need to facilitate and participate in the creation of a profound generational shift. There must be a move from being in a dominant position, the parents, accompanied by the others who are in a different position, the children. The status differential has to disappear, and a peer relationship between the generations without a power differential must be created. In the early stages, there is often difficulty on both sides. The period of preparation for taking up a sustaining place in the society has been much extended, with younger persons not completing the creation of their sustaining life patterns much before ages 35 to 40. Early career choices can be liquidated in the later 20s or early 30s. Mastering intimate partnerships can fail over and over again. It is complicated for the younger generation to learn how to become parents themselves. During this long transitional era, it is not uncommon for many to become financially dependent, either in whole or part, on parents for periods of time. Sometimes young adults need to move back in with parents. On the other side, many parents find it hard to stop being parents with their offspring during this era when their offspring are still struggling to create themselves. They feel temptation to try to be the ones to shape the offspring, to teach them, to find solutions for them. Long after such moves are experienced as disrespectful, foolish, intrusive, and or abusive by the offspring. Surrendering the traditional parent role by parents is emotionally stressful. For some, it has been their defining project, and life becomes meaningless if there is no more parenting to be done. For others as well, the surrender of the role as it has been lived means acceptance of life moving on and of having to begin to confront oncoming decline and mortality. But having sustaining and supportive relationship between the two generations is dependent upon both sides learning to be respectful and caring friends rather than anyone being in charge. It is also sustaining for the members of the older generation to continue to ask themselves, what is it that I can do to help my offspring with their challenges? There continues to be an array of such possibilities, including practical help, babysitting, transportation, errand running, arrangement making as examples, imparting wisdom, but only when asked to do so, providing an understanding and emotionally supportive ear at times of trouble, and being good and interesting company when present with children. In effect, parents need to conduct themselves as they would with any good friends who are members of their own generation when interacting with grown children. In addition, as long as it is possible, parents should avoid burdening their offspring with their own emotional troubles, with practical difficulties, with their fears about their futures, and with requests to help one another than with their relationship with their life partners. Temptations to do so should to burden the children with the travails of one's own adult life should be avoided unless they are invited to do that kind of sharing by the child or children. Instead, parents need to find needed emotionally supportive companionship with their own friends and other relatives and not burden their offspring with those kinds of preoccupations. And that's what I have to say about good enough parenting during the first many decades of young and middle aged adulthood, as the parents and the children continue to try and be in charge of their own respective set of lives. So let me get off of screen sharing again because I don't need to do any more now. Good, I'm off of screen sharing and I can just talk. Uh, what do I want to talk about? Do I want to go somewhere else? Oh, one of the thing that cued me was I saw a new couple I had not seen before. They're young people, but in their, yes, they're in their early 30s. They have an infant who's a little over 1 year old, and they got into a terrible fight. Uh, and it's still unresolved. Uh, he is partly still caught. He comes from a very intense, very close binding family. He has four siblings, and the parents and the children are together frequently, even though all the children are grown and out of the house, and they're full of bickering and fighting and carrying on. And the father wants to be the patriarch. He keeps trying to issue commands and recommendations to his grown children of all kinds about what they should do and what should happen. So the his young wife, they've been married for 5 years, has grievances. She is expected, as he is, to just blend into the family rituals, to show up when asked to show up, to be available to the parents for whatever uh, rituals the parents would like the family to participate in, and to allow the parents to lead. And she doesn't like it that they feel free to order her to surrender their infant grandchild to them. And they pick up the child and throw it in the air, and this child screams in fear. And she tells them to stop it and to give the child back to her. And they refuse, and they tell her the child's having fun and the child needs to get used to this. And it's a wonderful way that grandparents have of playing with children. And he doesn't take her side, and he doesn't tell them to stop it. So she's pissed at him, and she's torn between telling them to go fuck themselves and not seeing them anymore, and being silent and putting up with this in martyrdom. She doesn't feel like she has any good option. And then the second terrible wound she's carrying is that their child, who now, thank God, is healthy, was born 3 months premature and had to go to the infant, what's it called, the NICU, the infant intensive care unit, and had to live there for the first 3 months of its life. And they were frightened all the time because many organ systems had not developed fully, and it should have stayed in the uterus for much longer. And they had not only constant anxiety about the kid, but the COVID restrictions were already in place, so only one of them could go at a time, and they they could be on duty for several hours. They could do things. They could bond with the child. They could feed the child with a bottle. They could change the child's diaper. They could pick it up and hold it and rock it and try and help it to develop, but never together as a couple, only separately. One would go one day and another would go another day for 4 or 5 hours. And this event of the premature birth also took place on the heels of her having a miscarriage with the previous child too. So they were already on edge about, was this child going to die too, on top of everything else. So has the child mastered one developmental landmark after another, things that should have come together properly? The heart began to function properly. The digestive system started to function properly on the food that was being given. One after another, things were being ticked off, and the nurses were making notes of this, and they were leaving the parents for longer and longer times without a nurse there and without supervising. It was as if they were being tested for discharge. Were the parents now responding in reasonable ways, understood the challenges that still remain, and could take over the care of the child without the child being in the NICU with a nurse present? Or should they recommend that a nurse come and take up residence in the house, perhaps as an interim? All these decisions were needing to be made. And the, excuse me, I lost my earplug. The husband, once again, was keeping the parents informed of what was happening, made the mistake of saying the phrase that the hospital personnel were uncertain about whether it was reasonable to release the children to the parents' custody. And the father managed to turn that into that his children, his son and daughter-in-law, were not fit parents, and the children may be put in the foster care system. And he and his wife were going to have to move from Oregon to California and take over raising this infant because the hospital personnel were going to report the child neglect and abuse to the authorities, and the child was going to be taken away if somebody more responsible and caring didn't come immediately and step in and take over the child. And he told all the members of the family that he was getting ready to move to Southern California as soon as he could pack up his belongings. And he showed up at the hospital and he said, I'm ready to take over. And they didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And a huge fight ensued. And this time the wife said, you get the fuck out of here and leave us alone. I never want to see you again. And now the husband was crestfallen because he didn't want to have to abandon his family entirely. He was trying to figure out what kind of bridge could be created. And the third thing that had happened, they had had a horrible fight uh, because, let's see, what was this one about? Oh, the mother had called. Mother was getting ready to divorce father, and she wanted help. She couldn't pack all herself. She had some physical limitations. Would they this was before the baby was born. Would they leave and come up to Portland and help her pack? And they went. And even though there was a problematic pregnancy that the wife was going through, and she lost her nerve in the middle of this and said she changed her mind and she's not going to do it. And they made the trip for nothing. It was funny. I said to them, the nicest and most positive thing I heard was that the parents came up to the threshold of divorce, even though they didn't manage to get over the threshold yet. It sounded like their marriage had been terribly problematic, and father was a control freak, and I can imagine that the wife would be better off without him. So that was an example of parents pulling children into their marital dismay. The young couple had to go and help rescue mother from the father. I'm not a big fan of them doing that. I wish they had found a friend or a sibling of one of them to do that and not ask their children to participate in the breakup of the marriage. So that story I heard today came to mind. Fortunately, there's a lot of good things between these two people. He's willing to learn. I said, I don't fault you for what happened because this is a family where there's a kind of intensity of the bond between them. Uh, it's like the Kennedys on the compound. The children are never to go too far away as long as father is alive. And there are rituals that have been in place for decades before you got married. And yes, what is familiar is the carrying on of those rituals. And you've not fully come to promote your wife to being in second place yet, that she comes right after you. And she shouldn't be asked to defer to the rituals of the family that isn't her family. You are and she are in charge of the creation of a new family. You have to work out what's important to the two of you as a couple. And those are the rituals that you need to honor. And you can invite the members of the family you left to come to participate in the rituals you're going to design together. And I'd like you to be conscious of this, I said to him, and work with her. And I said to her, he's going to grieve. His relationship with his family is changing. It's starting to change already with your inputs, and he's hurting and he's frightened. And he may lose them entirely. He may get drummed out of the family. His father may declare that he's a persona non gratis, and he's dead as far as the father's concerned for his rebellion. And he may even be confronted with a demand that he get rid of his wife and bring the baby to live with the family, or never see the family again if he doesn't get rid of that horrible person he's married to. who knows what wars are going to start. And I said, I hope you'll have some compassion for you. All this is very painful for him. And if he loses his family entirely, he'll go into mourning for some long period of time. And I hope you can be compassionate and not demand an instant transformation in him, that he becomes your partner and your strong champion when there's dissonance between you and his family. He'll get there, but it's going to take him time. And he's going to suffer along that path. I hope you can be kind to him and forgiving for his suffering. This is an example of not good enough parenting during the year I've been trying to talk about. A live case showed up in my office. What else might I want to talk about today? Uh, Let me look at my book of stories. I haven't told a story in a while. I might pick one if it's relevant. Ah, yes. Oh, I think I read this. I did read this before. It's about the bond trader, the junk bond trader, who discovered social interest finally and found his altruism and became one of my heroes. Yes, I love that. I love that story, but I did share it in another. What do I have here? I have all kinds of strange contributions. Oh, yes. This one's called Mouthing Off to a Friend. I had known James for about 15 years when the incident I'm about to describe took place. The interval of our knowing each other began at the time the two of us were in our middle 20s and went on through the moment I am remembering, a time when we were on one side or another of our 40th birthdays. I am not exactly which side of our 40th. During our long interlude of shared companionate moments, there was a very important difference in how we wound up being embedded in our respective lives. As was so true for most of the members of my age cohort, I had married in my early 20s, and half of my peers had also done the same thing. And by early 30s, almost all the rest had also come to marry. That was the expected destination for young adults of my generation. Unfortunately, after adopting two children and after many years of marriage, my agonizing, wrong-headed first marriage had at last ended by my later 30s. I was I was then blessed to discover my precious present wife, and I was in the early stages of knitting together a proper, sustaining, and wonderful union and a stepfamily. James had kept me company through the dying years of my first marriage and on into the promise of a new life with a much better partner. During all that time, James had remained single. Across the sweep of his own young adulthood and on into the beginning of his middle years, James had continued to live in a fashion my mother would have described as being a, quote, perennial bachelor, unquote. He was reasonably affluent, healthy, witty, had what were considered excellent, quote, good looks, close quotes, could be quite charming and appear gallant, responsive, and caring to any woman meeting him for the first time, but he had never coupled seriously with any of them. He cried out increasingly often and with rising bitterness over the years that his life was cursed. He simply could not meet the quote, right, unquote woman. It was so frustrating to him, or so he said. He claimed to be inordinately miserable that he was still single. James dated extensively. On the surface, at least, he did not appear shy or unavailable. He would get caught up in the whirlwind of infatuation frequently, calling me or telling me in person what a wonderful new companion he had met. He would be excited to bring her around to his friends, myself included, so that they could see what good fortune had befallen him at last. But after a period of time, he would make a forlorn announcement that fate had teased and tormented him yet again. He would relate so disconsolately that he had discovered after an interval of time spent together that his then current companion had a flaw or flaws that were just fatal to his making a life with her. And with a good deal of anguished disappointment, he would separate from the female in question. During his early and on into his middle adulthood, the episodes of infatuation in which James spent exploring what might be possible with some new fling could last for a few days, for a few weeks, or even several months. But there was always the same, quote, disappointing, close quotes, end. The object of desire just wasn't right for him. The discovered defects of the potential beloved ranged from trivial physical characteristics, quote, I can't keep looking at that mole on her back, close quotes, to what he found to be ignoring annoying personality traits. Quote, she doesn't have my sense of humor, close quotes, or quote, she's a neat freak, close quotes, or quote, she's trying to dominate me, close quotes, or quote, she needs to fight with me too much, close quotes, or to simple human difference, quote, she doesn't want to go backpacking, close quotes, or quote, she doesn't know anything about investments and she doesn't seem terribly interested in learning, close quotes, or quote, she's too involved with her friends, close quotes. James never took a chance on living with any of the women he was trying out, and he certainly never became engaged to any of them. The best for which any of his affair partners could hope was that he would tell them that he was serious about them and he would make and keep a pledge of sexual exclusivity and fidelity, at least for a while. Still, in the end, he always bailed, most often leaving the then current woman bereft, confused, and not infrequently angry. I had met many of the transitorily adored. Most were decent persons. Some were admirable. Others were even exceptional. I often muttered to myself that my acquaintance was such a chicken shit fool, and there was sometimes pain for me when visiting with James. It was a pain that became particularly familiar to me in the dying days of my first marriage, when I could have cried tears of frustration at my envy and my desire to be the one who could go home with some woman seated by James's side. On the evening I am remembering as I compose these sentences, my own new precious Hermine was going to be occupied for the evening. I went after work to have, quote, a few drinks, close quote, with James. He had just separated yet again from his latest companion. We had martinis. I had two. No, I had three in quick succession and became lugubrious in exactly the same fashion as had become, oh, and he had become lugubrious in exactly the same fashion as become his unvarying practice. Quote, I don't know why I have to be tortured this way. God must have it in for me. Maybe I was some kind of evil fuck in some other life, and that's my punishment. Sarah seems so wonderful. She's beautiful, vivacious, fun loving, so very, very kind and appreciative. And she's a hell of an attorney. She made partner at her firm at a very young age. But it just doesn't work. She doesn't know how to give good head. I keep trying to teach her, but she doesn't seem to learn. Just another case of things not working out. That's something that's so critical to happiness between a man and a woman. Don't you think? But she fails miserably. I cried when I told her I didn't see how it'd ever be right between the two of us. I tried to make it easy for her. I said she was a great gal and I hoped she'd find someone who could love her as she deserves to be loved. But when am I going to find that special one? I need to get with it soon. I've always wanted to marry. I want to be a father. I can't believe my rotten fate. After all these years and two martinis, I had had it. I simply could no longer tolerate James' ridiculous construal of his circumstances. I had been filled up to the overflowing. Oh, for God's sakes, would you stop lying to yourself, to your women, and to the rest of us? You're never going to get married. Just admit it to yourself. I've watched wonderful women come and go out of your life. Any number of them would have made exceptional wives for you, but you don't want the realness of marriage. You get off on infatuation. Yes, it's such a wonderful drug, better than heroin. That's it. You're an infatuation junkie. And that's okay. It's your life, and there's no correct way for any of us to tell you that you must live. Do with yourself as you please, but do it openly and without duplicity. Just tell yourself, and I beg of you, tell the next woman you invite into your life that you can only thrive on the aphrodisiac of romance. You can't do without it. You'd rather be alone than settle for ordinary affection and respect. So you'll just go on climbing aboard the exhilarating roller coaster that'll start as soon as you and the next appealing woman discover each other, and you'll keep riding the rails of infatuation until it gentles down. And it will. It always does. And then you'll have to begin to visit the mundane, the disappointing, and the irritating. That's what marriage contains, a variety of opportunities to find the hidden beauty in the mundane, the irritating, the disappointing, as well as to enjoy the wonderful things a partnership can provide you that you haven't ever given yourself a chance to discover. But you won't do that work, and you're probably too frightened to let anyone matter that much to you. And do you know, there are enough wonderful women out there who are your mirror image, women who themselves shun any attachment that might become permanent. You can find a plethora, an overabundance of similarly inclined females willing to be in your life, more than a big enough supply for the entire rest of your days, and you wouldn't have to pretend to that portion of women who will show up that you want domesticity, that you're eager to be invested in it too. You aren't at all that interested in settling down. And I see no signs that you're ever going to be willing to accept about 70% of what you want and know that that would be good enough fit for any prospective wife of yours. And beyond that 70%, you would have embraced the limits of what's real and then learn to struggle, to problem solve, to negotiate, to compromise, and to do all the other work necessary to be able to suck joy and goodness out of a vital and enduring real partnership. You want your epitaph to read, "He was cursed because he never found the woman of his dreams," close quotes. But you refuse to learn that you can only find the woman of your dream in your own masturbation fantasies. She doesn't exist in real life. If I'm around to provide an epitaph for you, it will be different. It will be, "He loved getting off on the joy of infatuation that always accompanies the exploration of an ever new and ever expanding number of appealing possible companions. And then he was excellent at discovering the imperfections of each he found, and he comforted himself with his false belief about why he could never make a life with any particular one. So he lived his years devouring what he believed to be the most delicious appetizers, came away ever hungry, and never learned to eat a square and nourishing meal." Why on earth had I teed off on poor James that way? I'm usually not that unkind. Well, that evening was not only overflowing with moralistic annoyance with what I had clearly come to see as the duplicity with which James lived his life. I was also aware of the contrast he was exhibiting between his plight and my good fortune and hard work, beginning to make a new marriage. And as I had been absorbing his lament, I had also been reviewing in my mind a myriad of experience I was gaining as I listened to an increasing number of clients struggling to find and to sustain good relationships. All of this had been steadily altering and illuminating my understanding of the plight of my drinking companion and the dilemmas we all face. It can be no surprise if I write that much of the times I have spent in my office over the years I have been in practice, I have been spent with clients hurting as a result of some painful turbulence flowing from the nature of their relationships or non relationships with other humans. Some are like James, wallowing in pretense. Some are lonely because they have an insufficiency of human warmth in their existence. Some have been badly wounded along the path of life and find it hard not to keep revisiting and brooding about the scenes of their woundings. Some are trapped in present poisonous relationships and have neither the will nor the skill to be able to transform or to leave those relationships. Some are following the cultural project of, quote, looking for a life partner, close quotes, or at least, as you shall soon see, are insisting to themselves that that is such the case, and then are feeling distressed like James because they cannot find, quote, the right one, close quotes. And some fail over and over again to maintain effective and sustaining human connections because they're clueless about how to manage the creation of what is possible with anyone who shows up in their lives and might, in fact, be a reasonable person with whom to spend ongoing time. There are a variety of different factors that can create a relationship that can create relationship incompetency, emptiness, or turbulence. But that's a whole other book entirely. I shall only observe here that when I was in graduate school, I started with great personal urgency to reflect about the search of what is required to sustain supportive intimacy. I came preoccupied with the issue because my own early marriage was already becoming increasingly painful, even unbearable. And of course, because some of the coursework in which I was being exposed had contents that were providing me much food for thought. For example, I remember being in an introduction to clinical psychology class with E. Lowell Kelly, one of the founders of my profession and a giant in the field I wanted to enter. In an idle moment and related to no particular topic of his lecture that I can remember, Professor Kelly made a whimsical aside in his remarks to us, an aside whose words have stuck with me for over more than 60 years. Quote, well, in essence, we humans are social animals, pack animals, and by nature we are bent towards a need for warmth and connectedness with others. So it's quite simple. There are two kinds of human beings. There are those for whom the longing for love is enormous. It is so great that those so endowed will walk on hot coals, run any risk, try to obtain love over and over again, even though they have to may have to put up with endless hurts and disappointments. Even if bloody, they will persist in the end because in the end they believe there might be a shred of possibility that their efforts can secure love. Then there are others, those among us whose disappointments and hurts have crushed any such hope. All they want is to be cautious, to remain safe, to make sure they can minimize any suffering that might be inflicted on them at the hands of others. The latter sequester themselves, keep their relationships superficial, and try as much as they can to create hermit like existences. Early in my practice, though, I came to the conclusion that Professor Kelly was partly onto something, but was also oversimplifying an important facet of human life that was much more complex than his two kinds of people, unquote, metaphor. Yes, we are indeed social beings and must have human interactions to sustain us. The good feelings that come from being cherished is as important to the nourishment of our souls as food is to the nourishment of our bodies. But at birth, we enter the world in a state of exceptional helplessness and vulnerability. And then for many years, longer than any other living organism, we are dependent upon and hypersensitive to both the ministration and to the blunders of others who care for us. A certain minimum quantum of good parenting is critical for our unfolding development and for our ability to reach independence with the capacity to regulate our lives reasonably well. Most of us are fortunate enough to receive at least the minimum caring necessary for us to grow up. But no one has perfect parents. No one makes the journeys from birth to autonomy without some wounding. We are all subjected to some episodes of neglect, cruelty, incompetence at parenting, misunderstandings, lack of empathy. exploitation, seductions, cruel or foolish punishments, demands to learn principles for living that are ill considered and or lead to self handicapping, rigid scripting of what we are to become. And these are only some examples of harmful interactions with those who are raising us. But we also are the recipients of nurturance, soothing, kindness, caring, compassion, protection, support, wisdom, and a validation of our right to be ourselves as well. For too many humans, though, their primary and ongoing early experiences are mainly drawn from the former dark group listing I ran by. For those more fortunate, their primary stream of experiencing is composed mostly of the kinds of experiences with others that foster sturdy development. So we adults, contrary to Professor Kelly's simplistic duality, actually can be placed on a continuum. I would certainly agree that all of us do hunger for human belonging and warmth, and all of us are ambivalent about it and at the same time fear the array of unpleasant or even the terrible consequences that can be inflicted on us when we live out a vulnerable willingness to build close attachments. At one extreme side of the spectrum, then, are those Kelly said will run great risks and do almost anything if they believe love can result. And at the other extreme are those so wounded by their years of preparation for life that they're willing to embrace loneliness, that they can avoid closeness successfully and keep around them walls of protection from others. But most of us take up some position closer to the midpoint of the continuum, a position that expresses for each of us at least a partial desire to be open, to embrace, and to bond with others, but mixed with intermittent withdrawal from others and are engaging in various kinds of self protective maneuvers designed for us to keep distance and to minimize vulnerability. During the early years of my career, I began to learn that for those of us who live in this nation, the challenges of creating and supporting intimate closeness with others is complicated because we are raised immersed in certain cultural teachings that fill us with myths that confuse us. The Greeks had three terms for different kinds of human warmth: eros for the yearning for sexual union, philia for an appreciation of and respect for the personhood of the other and the wonderful benefits that flow from both persons by their mutual participation in a relationship, and agape, a caring that arises because it is based upon a commitment of selfless devotion. It entails the altruistic choice to seek someone else's well being proactively, even if there are uncertain or unknown prospects of reciprocation or benefit for the self. Unfortunately, in our culture, we are not practiced in identifying our thoughts and feelings in such way. We conflate what the Greeks clearly saw as separate and other important forms of caring and responsiveness as well into a single word, love, and thereby confuse ourselves and the others with whom we interact. I will address this more fully below. And I think I have used up my time. So I am going to stop in the middle. I had forgotten about all that I had written as I remembered my encounter with my friend that night in the bar. Gee, I went on for pages about very important things. So I'll continue there this Friday, and you can unmute yourself and make any comments you want to.
Arthur, one comment and then a question. The song "Is That All There is
Yeah.
really is that all there is to love?
No, I think it's really a lament is that I've done everything that's expected of me, and my life feels like crap. Is that all there is to life? That we live a period of time and
No,
then
is that
everything
all
turns
there
to
is
shit?
to love? That's a song. That's the song that I know of. Is that all there is to love? It's
I
actually a
know
song.
is that all there is? Let's keep dancing.
That's right. Yes,
That's all there is, my friend. Let's keep
that's right.
dancing.
Yes,
Uh,
Hmm.
that's the song I was referring to.
I see. Okay. The concept of the good enough parent. I'm sure you can recall our discussion yesterday, where I believe one of your clients is a woman whose son was schizophrenic,
Yes.
and kind of like, how do you explain or provide um, uh, I don't know, I was going to say solace, to the parent of a schizophrenic or an autistic or someone who's autistic, where in some ways there doesn't seem to be any kind of like end to the parenting.
Yeah, there could be an end to the parenting. They can place the child in the care of other people's and abandon the child. So there can be an end to parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a solution that some parents adopt.
Yeah.
But there's not an end to suffering. If they always have to live in that gap between the realities of the dreams they had for their children, and children who are not damaged in those ways, at least usually fulfill some portion of a parent's dreams.
Mm-hmm.
It's not total blight, but there are some children that will smash and crash every one of those dreams. And what's it like? Having experienced it myself, I walked around feeling like I had a harpoon in me, in my side, thrust into my side, and it was bleeding all the time, and there was no way to pull the harpoon out. That's what I felt. And
Mm-hmm.
I think as therapists, we can give that kind of empathy, at least, to the parent we're living with. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the agony is endless. And the best they can do is find some other things that are a delight in this world, because it's not going to be provided.
Right.
And I have this client I talk about periodically, who is the mother of a child injured at birth, who has an IQ of about 55, and has the mental status of a 4-year-old and will never grow beyond that. He's now in his late 30s, and she has been his mission, watching over him, seeing that she can drag out or facilitate the attainment of any part of his potential, that he can do the maximum imaginable with his limitations, is very important to her. That's her project. She has thrown everything else away. Lifting him as high as she can lift him is the thing that has meaning for her. And she's very pleased with some things she's made happen. She's taken him to the opera frequently as her companion when he was old enough to go to the opera. And he loves opera, and he knows the words to many of the arias. And in his spare time, he loves watching opera on television if he can find it. And she feels very pleased. One of his favorite experiences is to put a suit and tie on and go with her to the opera. So this was certainly one of the dreams she had for a grown child of hers, that they could go to the opera together. And she's managed to do that with this very, very limited child. Now, is she a fool? Is she a mad woman? What is she? She's still doing it. She's in her late 70s now. He's dying of kidney failure, and she's still there trying to sustain his life and making his life as rich and meaningful as possible. She's taken him on many trips to beautiful places in Europe, and to museums to see beautiful things. She wanted to expose him to that. I have no idea what kind of appreciation or lack of appreciation he has for that. But she still devotes herself to providing him what she considers are beautiful parenting experiences, and
So
thrown
her,
everything else for herself away.
yes, being a good enough parent for her is lifelong.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she can't just be a good enough parent. She has to be an exceptional parent for him, because his needs are exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
He can't use good enough parenting. She can't go off duty and take a weekend away with a friend, for instance, and he can entertain himself and even live by himself for a while she goes off. No,
Mm-hmm.
she has to do exceptional parenting all the time. She has to be the best parent imaginable, the
Mm-hmm.
most selfless, and the most accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
we all need a purpose in our life. Since I have little to do with my damaged child, I often feel like I'm a Nazi. I put him in the concentration camp, and I have to live with the guilt of doing that. But I made a conscious choice to invest myself in the lives of others, and to do it for people whom that investment will result in some benefit to them. There's some obvious gain that happened as a result of our interaction.
Hmm. Hmm. I see.
It's too painful for me if that isn't going on.
I see.
Yeah, I think there's painful nodes of, as you would say, Arthur, nodes of turbulence around family relationships in similar ways. Like when someone gets older and there's a need to maybe put someone in a nursing home,
Yes,
and the child has to decide whether how much of themselves and at what point are they going to kind of almost be drugged down so far that they can't even function.
yes,
Yeah, I think we can be very useful to help people
yes.
those tough decisions, because in the end there's no perfect decision on that, or the parent of a drug addicted child who's been enabling them for just a bit too long but can't let go.
Uh, that's I think we have to be truth tellers. Life does deal some people vicious blows and the wounds of which last lifelong, and it happens for no good reason. It just
Mhm.
happens capriciously.
Those are the people that we can keep company.
Yeah, we can cry with them sometimes. But if you have the right kind of romantic love, you can go off into the beautiful sunset with your partner and have bliss eternal.
Until they die.
But if you live properly, you'll be reunited with them again after you
Mm.
die.
Mm. Oh, there you go.
Eternity with my family, I don't know.
There's some movies on that theme. Do any of you know Last Year in Marienbad?
I don't know that one.
No.
Oh.
Oh, Marienbad is a spa. It's a resort spa in Germany. And this is a family that has an annual reunion at the spa in Marienbad. So at the beginning of the movie, you see them arriving, and they check into their rooms, and then they go meet in one of the places where people can lounge around, talk to each other, and they start talking, and they get very irritated and very annoyed and very angry with each other. And you can see this is quite a dysfunctional family that's going to meet and have a miserable time. Like they do this every year. They come together and all the family dysfunction starts showing up. And then the film stops suddenly. And it's like Groundhog Day, and it backs up, and there you are, and they're coming into the hotel again, and the movie goes on. They get to the same point, and the conversation is a little bit different, but the same thing happens, and they go back, and they come back into the hotel. I think it goes 7 or 8 times. The length of the film is 2 hours running time. You see the arrival, the checking into the hotel, and showing up in the room and starting to bicker 7 different times. The only thing that's different is the topic of the bickering is slightly different each time. It's a brilliant film.
Mhm.
Mm.
In Groundhog Day, the guy evolves. He becomes a better and
Mhm.
better human being as he's forced to confront his own stupidities over and
Yeah.
over again.
It's
He
the
does it
eternal
better.
return.
Yeah.
It gets better and better.
Yep. Uh, Anything else? Nope. All right. Then I will say goodbye, and I will pick up in the middle of these set of musings next time.
Okay.
All
Have
right.
a good day.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
Bye now.